So here we are. You've already been introduced to society and what it means to be a society and what a society is. So here I'm going to discuss what it is to become a member of society and how that happens. Generally speaking, becoming a member of society you'd think is just, you just show up and hey, I'm a member. But there's a great deal more to it. If you remember back to the anthropology unit, we talked about how information is passed on from animal to animal, and animals have a very unique way of passing things on. Their learning doesn't happen through society the way it happens for individuals, or for humans. And so here it is. I'm going to talk about the aspects of socialization and very quickly cover some of the key points that have to do with society and socialization. Um, So socialization is, as you can see here, I don't have to read it, you're all very capable of reading, but it is basically the lifelong process and how you learn how to function, behave, act in society. Um, and I was mentioning this before about how animals pass the information on from one to another. So too then do humans, and it's not genetic for us. It is an act. We have to physically act this out. If you remember from the psychology part, we were talking about nature versus nurture. You saw the case study of David Reimer and Jeannie, and how in many ways learning happens, and it happens in different capacities for different people at different times. But generally, for all of us, it starts at birth and starts with the family and then school and so forth and so forth. Sapienization is that process about learning beyond the basics of needing to survive. So that is the learning of the components of society and things that matter, like family and marriage and all the things that, as you see here, make us distinctly human. Primary socialization is the most basic functioning of society, and you see here learning language, eating, hygiene, learning how to deal with emotions, and to some extent learning how to behave as a female or female, and then gender roles are basically what this is all about. Um, Interestingly enough, having gone through this with my own children, it's amazing to see how children, like we have to teach a kid how to eat. Yeah, and it's kind of funny because if you just look at the parent, never mind looking at the kid, but looking at a parent feeding a child in the early stages of kids learning how to eat off of a spoon. And by the way, children learn very much through observational learning, and you kind of remember that if you don't refer back to the psychology unit. But observational learning is a huge, huge component for children to learn. But the other part too is the act of copying. And so observing is one thing, but copying is the other one. So a parent will sit in front of their kid and go when they're feeding the child. The parent opens their mouth, and then the child copies them. They're like, ah, they open their mouth, and then the parents stick the whatever spoon into the mouth of the child, and then they proceed to go, nom, 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 right? And they make these bizarre sounds, and the kid's kind of looking at them going, mum, 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 right? And this is all about, learning. Now, you'd think as a species, we couldn't have gone very far in our evolutionary history if somebody had to teach us how to eat. I mean, that's like saying to someone, teaching people how to breathe. It's just a thing that we do. And I would imagine that at some point in our history, we probably didn't need to say to people, mum, 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 right? You just kind of eat the food. And you're probably picturing me sitting here doing a lecture, going, mum, mum, and people watch me going, what the heck is he doing? But that's what I'm doing. Secondary socialization is learning how to function in larger situations beyond just the family and beyond the eating and hygiene and dealing with emotions and so forth. And it's, how to belong to a group in church, and et cetera, et cetera. Um, Incidentally, the development for people to be able to enter these larger groups um, coincides with people's moral development. And so a guy by the name of Lawrence Kohlberg, who we touched on in the last unit, basically said that children start to develop a moral understanding of the way that things work in and around the age of 5, which incidentally ties in really closely with the age that kids go to school. Anticipatory socialization is the idea that after you've been socialized and you've spent time working in different groups and through primary and secondary socialization, anticipatory is the ability of people who've gone through it to figure things out when they don't know what's going on. So, and you see here it says applying clues that we are able to act appropriately when encountering new situations. So let's say I've gone to church my entire life. I'm used to going to church, and now for the first time I'm going to go to a synagogue. So I'm going to go to a Jewish church, I guess is probably the best way to explain it. So I go to a synagogue and I've never been. So how do I behave? How do I act? Well, I don't know. I could ask, I could Google it, and that would work just fine. But if I'm kind of put in a situation where I have to go and I don't have time to research, I'm going to apply what I know about my behavior in church and pretty much try to draw parallels and pick up my cues from other people. And so I go into the synagogue and I'm thinking, okay, well, this is not necessarily a place where I walk in and start jumping around, high-fiving people, like I would, let's say, if I was at a club or, these are, like, well, of course not. But that's the point. Of course not. You're like, well, of course you don't do that. You should know better. But you don't know better because you've never done it. So all you could do is just guess and guesstimate and estimate as to how you should behave properly. And that's what anticipatory socialization is about. Resocialization is the follow-up to socialization, and that's usually when people have to relearn their behaviors. And so this is quite prevalent in things like prison, where prison is really like society's over exaggerated timeout, where they take you're removed from society because you just don't play nice with the other society, the individuals in society, and so we have to put you in prison, and it's a timeout that could last anywhere from a day to 3 years, and it's quite interesting how that plays out. So yeah. The agents of socialization would be the individuals or groups that basically have to be the ones who have to teach you this stuff. And it's not that they have to, but these are the people that you learn from. And it usually starts with the family, because the family is the first agent of socialization. They're the first group that you encounter. And subsequently, they teach you all of the basics, like how to behave, your language, and so forth and so forth, what love is, what trust is, what caring is, all of these things, that is kind of like your first introduction to the first group of people you'll ever meet. And that's your family. Then it goes to school, or by it, I mean the next step, but it also is people. And so people go to school afterwards, and what they do is they are socialized again, but in different situations because they're surrounded by people who aren't family. And so you start to pick up cues and learn cues from people who aren't your family. Now, it becomes an interesting mix of people, because you still have the leaders of the groups, which would be your teachers and your administrators. But then you have another group that kind of influences you, and that's your peer group. And peer groups play a significant role in people's development. Interesting thing that's happening right now, and we're living it. Full day kindergarten was introduced just recently in the last few years, and a lot of people are very, very skeptical about full day kindergarten, because little kids are going to school now from a younger age, whereas before, they would go, around 5, and it was expected that around the age of 5 you would go for a few days a week, but you'd still go home and spend time with whoever your primary givers are, your parents, your grandparents, whatever the case may be. And what's interesting now is with full day kindergarten, the peer group has started to replace the family. And what we are not seeing the effects of yet, and probably won't see until about the next 15 years, is the effect that full day kindergarten has on socialization and development. I can tell you from my own personal experience dealing with my own children, I try as a father to teach them right from wrong and so forth, but I'm not around them all day, every day, for the better part of a school year, which is 10 months. Kids pick up things from other kids very, very quickly. Their peer groups have suddenly become a bigger agent of socialization than the family. Now, you could count on the school as being, still teaching kids right from wrong, and they do. And you can count on the schools and the teachers for being excellent role models, which most of them are. Um, but you still can't diminish the influence that children have on children in peer groups. And I can tell you, I've struggled many times with my kids coming home and throwing words around. I'm like, where did you hear that word? Right? Like, oh, my friend said it. I'm like, yeah, you just need to not repeat that again, or mannerisms or behaviors that I'm like, oh, who does that? Oh, so and so does it at school. I'm like, yeah. Well, so FYI, you don't do what so and so says, right? Oh, but so and so is my friend. Yeah, no, not cool, right? And so we're starting to see the replacement of it, and I think in about 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 years, we're really going to see a great shift in society and what people value as being their fundamental relationships, because peer groups are slowly kind of overriding at a very young age, and kids are very, very impressionable. The media, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. Religion, also self-explanatory. The workplace starts to happen once you actually start getting a job, and then thereafter, right? And most people, kind of stop here. Total institutions are prisons, the army, and so forth. And we don't see a majority of the population in these total institutions, but they still play a role and an impact on people's development. Again, family, this is all self-explanatory. Feel free to go through this. But there it is. You learn language, communication, norms, how to look after yourself, brush your teeth, comb your hair, take a shower, la 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 la. I mentioned that the first group that you come in contact with, and they are the ones who are basically your home base of socialization. Interestingly enough, most families, when I say most families, it's kind of like a thing that the family usually really does reinforce how smart and how loved and how much trust you have between the members of the family. Now, it's fair to say that generally the majority of the population, or a good portion of the population, kind of experiences this. And what ends up happening is, as kids leave home and go to school, there's just like a sudden shift. You are no longer the smart one. You're no longer the center of attention. There is no trust, and that also depends also on birth order, mind you, right? Because if you're the oldest, you're the first one in the family, you're the focus of attention. If you become the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth, you're kind of like, without making it sound like you're an afterthought, but you're not the first. And if you're not really believing in what I'm telling you, there are countless studies done on birth order, and interestingly enough, the effects of birth order. And if you really are interested, I'd be more than happy to share some of the research that I come across regarding birth order, and it's quite fascinating. Anyway, so needless to say, once you get to school, it kind of tends to kind of overshadow a lot of this stuff, and a lot of kids really get shocked. In fact, this is probably the primary reason why a lot of kids cry within the first week of going to school, because it's such a dramatic shift for many of them. School is the next, again, agent to teach formal rules. Now people are away from the family, and this really, truly is, for many kids, a big, big shocking transition. You'll see here I say that schools have two functions, manifest and latent. You'll see what I'm talking about that in a minute. So manifest is basically what do we expect? The expected function of a school is just that, academic skills, life skills, learning skills, all of these things that school teaches you, how to play nicely with other kids, how to get along with people who aren't your family, how to relate to people that you've never met before, and so forth and so forth. This is an expected function of school. The latent functions are the unintended, just the unintended functions where we were like, that's not really what we had planned, but yeah, it's actually working pretty well. Like I mentioned before, socializing us, teaching us how to cooperate, teach us how to work with people we don't like. These are the hidden unintended functions. But with these functions also come other functions that we really didn't quite expect to happen. Things like how to be neat, how to be on time, when to speak, when to be silent. Even though, yes, it's a part of school, it kind of flows with school, right? And it's not one of those things, well, today we're going to learn to be neat, right? It's just a thing that kind of comes with it. But there are other things too. I'll leave this here. First, let me talk about this. Other things like learning how to how to stand up when the bell rings. How to sing "O Canada," how to show respect for your country. You know, this is also how to teach you to be on time. And you see here it says good for the future workplace. Many people in education talk about the pre-industrial concept of education, which is just teaching people how to be good workers. Getting up early, going to your job, having lunch at a certain time, leaving your job, going home. You do that in school all the time, and you're like, wow, this school sucks. And you're like, yeah, but that's what a job is. You get up when you don't want to, you go to your job, you eat lunch when you're told to eat lunch, you go back from lunch when you're done your lunch, and you work until it's time to go home. But there are other unintended functions that come with it. Things like, we never expected people to learn how to be bullies. We never expected people to learn foul language. These are unintended learnings that were like, whoa, it's did not expect that. We didn't teach people how to cheat on tests. These are unintended learnings, and I don't think a school wants people to learn how to swear or cheat. But this happens because you have no influence over the members that are there. You can simply try to control it, but society always finds a way. Anyway, gender role education happens, and again, this is also we're seeing a shift in that as well. There's a 5-minute video a few years ago. This was a big thing. So I'm sitting in this PD session on a PD day. So you guys are all at home. The teachers are at school learning about school, and the principal comes in and says, "Hey, okay, everybody, we're going to be learning about why boys are different than girls." And to which every kind of teacher rolled their eyes and went, "Shocking! Boys are different from girls? Wow! Go on." Right? And so then we watched this video, and this guest speaker came in who said, boys are built differently than girls. We're like, yep, good, we got that, great. We just hold on a second, let me take notes. And then he went on to say that, but boys and girls' brains are wired differently. So anyway, you could watch this YouTube video. It's called Why Gender Matters, and it's with Dr. Sachs, who's a very interesting fellow who's a doctor, but it has nothing to do with education. But he does talk about why boys and girls' brains are different. Peer groups are another one. I mentioned this before. Again, a lot of this stuff is really self-explanatory, and you could pretty much read it. But very interesting to note that your peer group is kind of tied in with school. Your friends you build your friendships about the same time you start building school relationships. And as you go through school, you have this core group that you generally stay with for your entire elementary and high school careers. I'm going to call it a career because it really is like a job. And as you go through, you have your relationships with these people, and some last and some don't. But there's still a significant amount of learning that happens. You learn from them and they learn from you. But then there's also other things that you learn, right? Learn that you can do things with your friends that you can't do with your family. And again, other things that tend to be very situational, that people feel that they could be closer with their peers because their peers understand them and their families don't. Which, if you really truly think about it, your peers are about as close to you genetically as the people who are living 3 countries away from here. I mean, let's face it, you are closely genetically tied to your family members, and if anyone knows you better than anyone, it's your parents, because they made you. Things that happen with peer socialization, it's interesting because it can go 2 ways. It can go in a very positive way if you have a very good peer group, and I'm going to use the word good in air quotes. But if you have a peer group that is good and they have good values and so forth and so forth, they'll reinforce that. On the flip side, if you have a peer group that whose values are less than positive, there'll be a reinforcement there. And people will often say, choose your friends carefully because they will shape you. And you're like, no, 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 my friends don't. Yeah, they really do. They really, really do. Because whether you choose to believe it or not, the peer group has a significant influence on us. And it doesn't begin and end at school, it continues on. The media is pretty self-explanatory. Movies, radio, television, printed, electronic media. It's all out there. And you see here, people are exposed to media from a very early age. It was a thing once upon a time that parents would think that educational TV was good for their kids, so they would literally park a kid as a toddler in front of a television and put on little Einsteins and go, yeah, my kid's learning. There have been countless studies to show, in fact, that is a misconception. And even though you do learn some things, the studies never say that you don't learn anything, but they do say that there's a significant overstatement into what people actually do learn from these children's shows and these quote-unquote educational programs. So the media is a very dangerous social agent of socialization, because yes, though there are controlling measures out there to kind of prevent the media from ultimately, messing with people's minds, the media has its own self-serving function, and fundamentally that is to create consumers. The media is just a prolonged commercial, whether it be a TV show or a movie or a talk show or it's an educational program or a cartoon. It's all about a secondary motive. And what it is consumerism. Basically, things you watch on TV are telling you, whether overtly or subliminally, telling you to buy things, or they're shaping your behaviors, the way you color your hair or style your hair, the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the attitudes you have, the values you have. We may not see these people as role models because we don't say, well, I really like that person, I will role model, or I will make him my role model, and I will follow him and do as he does. You don't do that. Nobody consciously does that, but you see things and unconsciously you kind of register them and keep them. Again, there are countless misrepresentations in the media, unrealistic expectations in the media. We'll get to that a little bit later on, but fundamentally just know that the media really does have a significant impact on socializing us. Here are some stats. The amount of time people spend watching TV. This what I found was staggering. The total amount of time spent in school to age 18 is 1,000 hours, and the amount of time you spend watching TV or some kind of taking in media is 15,000. So literally 1/15. The amount of time you spend educating yourself versus the amount of time you spend absorbing media is quite staggering. The workplace, eventually you learn things that the school kind of started teaching you: punctuality, appropriate dress, respect for authority, and so forth. This is just kind of follow-up. And though you do learn some new skills and some new behaviors, the workplace is one of the last agents of socialization. Things that you start to pick up are things like specialized language, procedures, and rules. It's quite interesting when you do get that part-time job the first time. It is a bit of a transition for a lot of people. The expectation they have to show up on time and blah blah blah, and your boss is not your friend. This becomes quite difficult for some people to accept very early on. But you eventually learn that your boss is your boss and your friends are your friends, and though your boss may care about you, fundamentally you have a job to do, and your boss is not there to hold your hand. Religion kind of starts at a very young age, but even though it's placed here, it does start sometimes in some cases just as soon as the family, and it does really have a significant role in how we think, how we behave, what our attitudes are towards things, towards other people, and so forth. and religion is always there. In many ways, you'll learn things like gender roles, sexual conduct, responsibility, family, the afterlife. And in the afterlife, you could say, well, like I care about heaven. But there's more to it than that. I would argue that for religions, the afterlife is that sense of the future. It's not so much the here and now, but what's going to happen later. And for a lot of people, it starts to kind of connect them to the sense of how long their lives may be, or what their ultimate goal is, and what are you really doing what you're doing for? Are you doing it for yourself? Are you doing it for your family? Are you doing it because you think you're going to get into heaven? It's that kind of a notion. Well, there you go. That pretty much says everything that I said before. Religious institutions, however, aren't always as powerful as they used to be. In some cases, they still are, but in some cases, there you see a diminishing power over people. We're in fact starting to see fewer people starting to take religion for what it is. Before it used to be the be-all and end-all. Now it's just kind of like that guide to life. And again, that's not for everyone, but for some. Total institutions like prisons, asylums, cults, army, and so forth, their job is to deconstruct who you are and reconstruct you as they see fit. Now, ask yourself, is that a fair assessment? The answer that you should be giving yourself is yes. One thing that they do, and they do this very, very well. It's very systematic in how they do this. You go to the army. What do? They strip you of your identity. You're private. You're right from the beginning. You have the same haircut as everyone else. You have the same clothes as everyone else. You have the same bed as everyone else. You are just like everyone else. Same thing with prisons. They take away your clothing, your personal belongings. They sometimes, well, in the past they used to shave people's heads, but that was mostly for hygiene. But it's breaking you down. They take away your name. They give you a number. You have the same accommodations as everyone else, and so forth and so forth. And ultimately, it's kind of breaking you down to your basic self, and then rebuilding you and how they see fit with their rules and how they kind of guide you through your day. And this is repeated over and over and over again, which eventually should, in theory, make you submissive. And here we go. This is what I said before, the idea of removing your individuality and giving you a group mentality, a group identity. Asylums and prisons, they take it that next step, which is they isolate you from your past, from your family, from other members of society, from your routines. And it's all about taking that which you knew away and everything that you had been associated with to replace that with something else. Now, in the case of people who have a criminal past, it's probably a good thing. You want to remove them from their criminal elements and their habits and other stuff like that, because the last thing you want is a criminal to stay a criminal, and that's what prisons, I guess, try to do. Again, this is all the same stuff. The idea that everything is closely supervised and contrived. You really don't have much choice. It's lights out at a certain time. You eat at a certain time. Activities are set for a certain time, and you're like, wow, that's not really that far from school. And in some schools, they give you a uniform. You have your times when you begin, your times when you get your break, there are times when you get your physical activity, there are times when you go home. The difference between a prison and a school is that you get to go home at the end of the day. This is the last bit. It's the theories. We talked about this before. I covered this before, but if you want to, you can go through and revisit these to kind of help you understand everything that we kind of covered. So that's it. That's the lecture. I hope it was pretty fast. Your assignment is coming up momentarily. Keep an eye on it. It has to do with the agents of civilization, or agents of socialization, and it's basically I'm going to ask you to examine your own socialization process and what went into who and what went into making you you.